Apparently Southampton are understood to have admired his high pressing style with in the Red Bull mentality, and with Ralph Husenhuddle, who was also in charge of Southampton for 4 years. He's also comes from the RB and Red Bull group and Red Bull mentality and philosophy. So that wouldn't be maybe too hard for the players to adapt to it, given that Husenhuddle, I can't say names right now, was in charge to start the season. Now, Marsch has remained in the UK. I don't know if he was waiting for this to come up so quickly, but I think it would be pretty interesting for Marsch to be rehired a week after he got fired, when you had a Steven Gerrard out there, you have a Frank Lampard out there, guys that I think are actively looking for their next job as well, and for Jesse Marsch to get the nod over those guys. But I think there was a clear sense of style of play that maybe Southampton are attracted to. And from what I understand, and somebody can verify this for me, either listening, hit us up at ISWTpod on Twitter or here in the YouTube chat, the Leeds were the single most harshly penalized club in the league by VAR, costing them a net of -5 points. Wow. And they were very close in a lot of games, and I always thought they had a good game plan against the top clubs. I think the issue with Jesse Marsch is when a team sits back against them, they don't really like, what are we supposed to do? Like, we have to possess the ball right now. Possession isn't really the key to that type of philosophy.
The same thing happened in MLS. Teams that played the Red Bulls would drop, sit, and counter every time. And if Red Bulls weren't fortunate to get that early goal to force you out, and then you have to all of a sudden start taking the initiative, then they struggled in a lot of cases because they weren't a team that possessed the ball. They didn't keep the ball. And when I look at the U.S. men's national team, some people may say, we just want to win, we don't care. But we all know we want to see a team that's dynamic and keeps the ball and knows how to dominate possession, knows how to win games, of course, but is attractive to watch. It's not lump the ball forward and just win the ball in the final third and score. No one wants to see that. It really wasn't attractive. So, in terms of being a little bit more dynamic with the style of play, I don't think he has to be tied to that system. I know that system got him there, but I think it's time where you start to realize, okay, I like bits and pieces of this philosophy, but maybe this is where you start to expand and grow as a manager and trying different styles with the players that you have.
Well, wasn't that a little bit of the criticism at Leipzig, was that it was an iterative gegenpress? It wasn't a traditional gegenpress. It was like, his own spin on how it was implemented. And I don't mean that in a bad way. I mean that actually in a good way, of his willingness to think differently, right? You have to be able to evolve, because in the same way that has become a very, not sexy, but a very popular style of play, the game is going to continue to iterate because teams are going to figure that out. And when you're fighting at the bottom of the Premier League, where you can't get those 5 points that Jimmy mentioned, where you can't sit comfortably in the middle of the table, it's really hard, because the teams that you're playing against you're giving up possession to, and then the teams that you're battling at the bottom of the table are happy to play it just like in a championship game, right? Lump that ball in the box, create chaos, and really challenge your organizational structure that may have relied upon, we are the small fish playing against the big one who's going to have possession. We want to press high up the field, win the ball in dangerous areas, and go to goal.
Okay, so what I find interesting is whether everybody listening, watching, believes that Jesse Marsch should wait to see about the U.S. soccer job. I don't think, given my conversation with him when I went to go to Leeds, the timing at that particular moment, obviously, had just beaten Chelsea 3-0. Everything's on a big high when I showed up. I could see why he's like, I'm not even thinking about the U.S. men's national team or Greg Berhalter. Even when we saw press conferences before the World Cup, it's like the farthest thing from his mind. He's just focused on his club. I get the sense he's going to take the Southampton job if it's available.
I agree.
But do you think he should wait, Charlie? Because this U.S. soccer job ahead of this World Cup is significant. It's a significant World Cup.
Well, let's just put it this way. And you're sitting at the bottom of the Premier League with 15 points. How many people actually think he could save this club and get them out of promotion? It's almost if you don't do it, you weren't expected to do it. But if you do it, I think there's a lot of upside, and you might be known as that manager that can just save clubs from relegation. And that's not the best, I think, bucket to be a part of, but it's definitely not the worst. Knowing that clubs, anytime they're in a situation like this, they're dropping points, they're in a struggle. If they're floating with the relegation, they're like, hey, Jesse Marsch, we got to hire him. We know he can get the most out of these players in a short amount of time. So,
and he proved it last year, keeping Leeds up.
Yeah,
that
and he does a great job with youth. Southampton has one of the best youth academies in the world. So he's going to did and still produce
or known
players.
for,
yeah. So I think it's a job that you take. If I'm in Jesse Marsch's shoes, I'm taking the job. You're still in the Premier League. You have a chance. You're at the bottom. The expectations are pretty low. And if you rise above it and you get Southampton out, you're only 4 points.
You're a legend.
Yeah, you're a legend.
So you're 4 points behind Leeds, Heath. So in some ways, if he takes the job, he could help Southampton stay up and potentially relegate his former club, which would be quite the saucy narrative.
That would be saucy.
I remember, and I may have mentioned this before, but I remember talking to Dax McCarty and Sasha and other guys that played for Jesse, who obviously loved Jesse in their roles with him, like you do any manager that empowers your role or helps you. But he was seemingly, and this was 7, 8 years ago, I guess, maybe 5 years ago, whatever it was. I guess it'd have to be 5 years ago. But it was that the way in which he empowered players, created trust. He had these like leadership groups of empowering players to be accountable, to have a voice and say in things. And obviously we know that's a dangerous game when you open up to thoughts and opinions that maybe don't come from the right perspective, or you have to take that into mind. But I do think, like Charlie said, that could be a good role for him, right? It's like coming in here, lighting this fire, motivating this team, getting them to believe in themselves. Because if you remember when you came in and did it last year, it was a lot about like getting them to believe how good they are, right? And that was sort of the narrative, which is like, we're making a few adjustments, but we're not changing this team. It's not because these guys aren't good enough to play in the Premier League. We have to change the mentality and get them to believe how good they are. And I don't remember the exact quote that he had, but he did a number of narratives or interviews when they started to get points about like, this is what it's about. It's like getting them to believe in themselves. And sounds silly, but it's what saved them, well, now they're back in that fight again, but it saved them millions and millions of dollars to keep them in the league on the final day last season.
I think the quote was just believe. He had
believe
as they were leaving the locker room.
Interesting. Well, Jesse Marsch news, obviously we'll keep everybody up to date on the latest with him and the decisions he's going to make and how that impacts the rest of U.S. soccer, most specifically the U.S. men's national team head coaching job, which still needs a sporting director and a general manager and all that good stuff.
Jimmy.
Yes.
One last thing.
Shoot.
I do think what I do like is that it is a sign of the respect for managers that we are now starting to develop, that he's instantly linked. Now, whether it happens or not or whatever is different, but like he's now played at enough clubs. We talk about national team coach or whatever experience. He's now linked to another club, right? Whereas before we saw with Bob Bradley, yes, he went to another club, but as soon as he was out, there was no discussion of like what happens next, like he was never really given a long enough window. They didn't get the results and he was out, and that was the end of that run. Whereas I think Jesse is paving that way for him to be a career Premier League or
high level
divisions and top leagues in Europe manager, which I don't think we've, again, we have a couple Matarazzo and we've got Wagner, but
do we think that if he takes a Southampton job and it doesn't go well, that would slow down people's interest in hiring him? Maybe, I mean, that's the risk, right?
Maybe I don't think people's, but Premier League certainly. I don't think he gets another shot if he can't figure out where he fits into the conversation. But we've seen managers, that could mean that he settles into being a championship manager for a few years, get a team back up, and maybe you're back in that conversation again, right? You got to go and prove something. I think at that point, within regards of the top two divisions in England. That's my opinion anyway. Charlie.
Yeah. I think he will prove himself if he takes this job, he gets hired, and he keeps them up. I think he's always going to be considered for Premier League positions. So it's I don't think there's a big risk in taking this job, but there's a high reward. That's for certain, and that's all you can ask for. He's trying to prove himself over there. You get another opportunity in the Prem, you take it. You
timing,
absolutely take it, and it's not. It's not like an impossible job. You're only 4 points out of the relegation. So if he believes in the players that they have, that he goes, I can win with this group, then you take this job.